All right. So we'll go ahead and start. It's 2:07 right now. We can start with introductions. If you guys want to go around and introduce yourselves.
Sure, Bob Kelly, Stevenson.
Michael Brazil, Stevenson.
Blake Nervino, Stevenson.
Brad Samuelson, I'm here sitting for Amsterdam, a consultant.
Lou Myers, Growing Eastside. George Barkland, Mutual Water.
Black and Harmon, Clayton Water District, they don't grow it.
Scott Menifee, Clayton Water District grower. Jacob Menifee, just a grower.
All right, and then real quick, Chris and Greg, were you able to hear everybody?
I did not get the last two after Larkin.
You guys want to?
Scott Menifee and my son Jacob.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
And yes, I can hear you too. Thank you.
And then if you want to see, it's just Greg's face and that's it. So.
On a beach somewhere, huh?
All right, and then people on Zoom, if
Those
you
are
want.
clouds. That's my head in the clouds, just for the record.
All right, so if you guys want to introduce yourselves on Zoom.
Yeah, Greg Young, you guys all know me.
Chris Hebner with EKI.
And then Danielle, for the county, she has no microphone, so she'll be listening in. All right, so right now be public comment period. Does anybody want to mention anything?
Greg, what are you seeing as feedback for the reception of the allocation buckets from the public?
That's really what I think that's kind of a focus of what we want to talk about today on that. So
Cool.
it should be stuff that's not on the agenda, but I'm happy to talk about that and just give it a couple minutes, Blake.
Sorry.
Okay.
I was gonna say, I gave the committee report at the last GSA board meeting, and a couple board members called me afterwards and asked if we had anything written for them, which makes sense, because I just went up there and talked about what I thought I remembered. But they would like something written, like for the record, for them to have.
Okay.
Is that something that we can move for, so we can come out of this meeting with not necessarily minutes, but actually recommendations?
Yeah, so sorry, Brad, to that point, the TAC has always had the opportunity when there's a quorum, which I think we have, correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle, or
Yeah, for the first time last meeting.
yeah. And so if it chooses to take an action other than just report out on discussion, if it wants to create a recommendation as the TAC, even if that recommendation has a couple of varying points in it, then we can have that as a written record of TAC's recommendations to the board. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you, that's very good. That as a group, when we
I agree.
get some.
Something.
Yeah.
So any other public comment then? And apologies for not being able to be there in person today. I know that always makes it a little more challenging. But we'll make it work.
All right, if there's no public comment, Greg or Chris, do you guys have anything to say?
Nope, I'm all set for now.
Okay. So then the next part is approval of the minutes from last month. So if you guys have any suggestions for changes or
I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes. They seem pretty generic when I look at them.
all right. Okay, so minutes are approved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And all against? Okay. All right, so the next one is allocation framework. So Greg, if you want to take this one.
Yeah, so the way we kind of have this set up is what I would describe as a continuation with both 4 and 5 of the prior conversations. At our last TAC meeting, you guys were essentially the first to see the values and the presentation and the discussion. And subsequent to that, we did a presentation at the McKean board meeting. There was a presentation the following evening at the Farm Bureau facility. Bob Gianpoli, I believe, gave a presentation out at LeGrand Athlone. And I think others of you have maybe had conversations in various one-on-one venues or other points. So what we really want to do is circle back and start hearing what you guys are maybe hearing out in the landscape. What are some comments we should start thinking about in working, even thinking about, to Brad's point, is there a set of advisory recommendations you would want to make at this point in time back up to the board at its meeting? What is it, May 9th? I might have that date wrong, but the next board meeting in May.
Yeah.
So nothing has changed in the framework. The board is just wanting to continue to listen and hear comments about the framework and how we're looking at those different land classifications and how they will be receiving the two different buckets of allocation and how that will be set up as this 5-year chunk of water. That's the whole framework discussion, and then, kind of jumping into 5. So I don't think we need to separate these two conversations on the agenda, is the 13-inch number for sustainable yield and the 11-inch number as a starting point for APA. So I want to get feedback from all of you. What are you hearing? What have you've had a chance to think about all these pieces a little bit more? I do probably should be recognized that the board has a strategic ad hoc that is working on making this framework and those numbers or putting them into a policy language to try and draft more of this so it will become formal policy to be adopted in July of this year. So that's their intent, and they're working on that, but there's nothing to release along that line yet.
I have a question. You're going to hear me. I'm kind of loud because my voice is loud and I'm standing right next to the phone, but you know who this is.
Yeah, Bob.
You're the only one that rhymes, Bob.
Yeah. With respect to what is on record at the assessor's office as to the designation of ag categories, there's going to be quite a bit of trying to get things straightened out as we get close to the implementation in 2026. Will there be a grace period with respect to how they fall into those categories if there is a change in to the assessor's role as to the category classification? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and maybe just by example, if something is, we'll do a couple of examples. Currently listed by the assessor as irrigated ag, but yet it's not being irrigated. That's one way. The other way is it's recognized as maybe not being irrigated ag, but yet it is being irrigated and it wants an allocation, and so it needs to be recognized that way.
Yeah, and because the current allocation framework is pretty specific as to when you get your allocation. So I'm just wondering, is there going to be a timing lag problem when they have to correct what the assessor's records show versus what is in actual reality?
It's a great question and something we have to find a path through. As you know, the county assessor's office is not the GSA, and so we have to kind of find that pathway to work through that. What I think might help towards that end is in the next few weeks, the intent is to send out some mailings related to what's item 6 on the agenda about the platform. And that will grant access, and you'll see and be able to start linking together all those parcels. And so if there is if through that process as one pathway, Bob, I'm not saying that's the only pathway, if you find, hey, I'm irrigating this parcel and it's not showing up as land associated with me right now, then maybe that's an early indicator to start creating a list of lands that we have to go back to the assessor's office and address. And then I think there are standing questions to make sure we understand when that land came into production. Did it just start this last year? Has it been? And the assessor is lagging behind and hasn't caught up? And how does that affect potential fees that have been paid historically by others, et cetera? So it's not a clean issue, but it's something we should be able to work through. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I agree, and I think maybe a effort made to get the word out to people to check what the status as far as the assessor is concerned, as to what category their lands fall under, because it's a big difference if there's a mistake, versus the assessor versus what's in practice.
To Bob's point, Greg, it seems to me like it would make sense that there would have to be an appeal process. The people that were miscategorized as non-irrigated but have been irrigated also means that they didn't get dinged for the 218 money.
Yep.
So then there's also a factor that they didn't legally get a vote, but I understand, what's in the past is in the past, and their vote likely wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election. So hopefully that legal ramification is negligible, but they are going to have to pay into that 218 to get.
Yeah, I agree.
To get that reimbursement, to get their APA bucket, it would seem.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about what may become kind of an anomaly between the lands that are irrigated. If you recall, we have those three classifications: irrigated, and then managed as wetlands, and then not irrigated. And the ones that are managed as wetlands have this opt-in and may have to pay fees, and the ones managed or as grazing may also have an opt-in but may have to pay fees. So we're kind of talking about an anomaly that might be, it's been irrigated, but it's been mischaracterized, and it may need to pay fees in order for it, back fees, in order for it to be able to show that it is truly getting an allocation as irrigated. So I think this is an outstanding question. I believe Eric forwarded some question on this same point regarding some parcels to check that I know we're looking at and trying to find the answers to how those were addressed. There's historically, and this is not unique to Merced, there's a lot of mistakes in assessor data. And we're going to need to find a pathway through that. The framework talks about a appeal process that will be established. And that appeal process, what it said in the framework that was released back in February, and the details of this are starting to at least be flagged maybe a little bit more, is the GSA will establish a process to appeal allocations for consideration of special circumstances, including conditions such as the land use category is determined by the assessor's office. So we've recognized that there is going to need to be something there. How exactly we handle that, we need to find something that's fair and not administratively cumbersome.
Yeah, I foresee there will be an issue with, those who have been in the know and paying attention could have been taking their land and setting it aside while maybe providing some investments through that 2015 to 2020 window, but maybe they were only dry farming it. So now that allocation's released, they want to start farming it, but they might not receive an APA bucket based on what was done. But what if that land has been farmed for the last 50 years? I would think they would also have a grounds to approach for an appeal. Would that make sense?
Yeah, sorry, I'm skimming the current framework because I thought we had talked about some dates in here. You think I would have committed all this to memory by now, but I guess not.
You're
Uh,
busy. I don't blame you. I can't remember half of it.
There was, and I know it's in here somewhere that talked about the farming. Oh, here it is. Land use designation would be set to actual land use that existed between January 2015 and January 1, 2023, as designated by the Merced County Assessor's Office. So it's really if they essentially started farming just last year or just this year, that it raises a question. And that might be an area if you guys want to, if there's some strong feelings about changing that to January 1, 2024 or something, those are inputs that the board is going to need to hear if there's concerns one way or the other.
Well, I mean, I can think of patches that haven't been irrigated since 2015, but were leveled and burned up. Those people may have issues. They won't get anything. They won't get a sustainable yield.
I've got a property that has that issue. I installed a brand new well in 2017. Sigma was coming. I put my irrigation line all the way to the edge of this one pasture. So it's piped and ready to go. I was like, I'm not going to plant this thing until I know what happens with Sigma. And that was back in 2019. But I've done some, like, it's been big farm, but I've been dry farming into local dairy. So I've been pushing a ton of water.
I guess the question, Lou, in that case, what's on your tax roll? Are you listed as grazing for that parcel, or are you listed as irrigated ag?
I just checked that after this conversation, and of course, I'm listed as grazing. Even though I installed wells, by the way, backing up here, the original well was installed in the 70s. So it's not like, in fact, that well I gave to the county for their testing. Or sorry, I gave to the GSA for their testing. But I installed 2 new wells on that parcel in 2017.
So you spent like $1 million.
So I spent like $1 million on that property. And I've got a pipeline going right to it for olives that I was going to extend our olive grove, but I haven't put the olives in, waiting on this. So I feel like I've been a good citizen because I haven't been using the water. But that could be problematic for me in a big way.
Yeah,
Greg,
I think there's
go ahead.
so many one-offs like that. And I can think of a couple other people I know. And yeah. There's got to be no problem. Everybody's gonna go up.
I think that, Michael and I know a couple of people that, you got Lou here trying to be a good citizen, and we know plenty of other people who are like, I'm going to pump until they put me in handcuffs. And
planted every acre they've had.
and they're planted wall to wall, and we need to be able to be like, okay, a one size shoe will not fit everybody here, and abide by the guidelines of the GSA, the intent. And I think that would be something that we could come to agreement on, that we would want to make a recommendation to the board. If we do in fact have a.
Yeah, I think that's good. Sure.
And maybe that's contemplated in the appeal process.
I'm curious of how you, there are lots of one-offs, but let's recognize that. And there is no right answer, nor there's no perfect answer to dealing with this, right?
Right.
And so we're trying to also balance all the administrative questions. So if I, take Lou's example, there's currently an opt-in opportunity for that land to come in and to have some sort of fees. And, maybe in the determination of what fees are associated with that.
Yeah.
As grazing land, that allocation and that opt-in would give him sustainable yield, because the intent is not to give him the ramp down of APA in an overdraft in an area that has groundwater levels below the minimum threshold that we're trying to achieve. So it's you'd opt in you'd get sustainable yield and you go plant and it's part of your farm unit and you manage your allocation across all the parcels that are associated with that farming operation. So you wouldn't, in that case, because you haven't been pumping, Lou, you would not get the APA. But the
Yeah,
intent of the APA was to help people shift away from overuse.
the other concern is I've got my pumping station and main wells on the APN next door. And per the current allocation rules, I can only use the wells on the property,
On the APA.
on the APN, on the APN, and that's arrangement, designated arrangement.
That it's on, yeah.
So I've got all the infrastructure ready to go out to that one based upon the other APNs that I couldn't use in that circumstance.
Another one-off.
I don't know. Being self-serving, I would say, I obviously, this has been farmed for 70 years, or maybe not 70, 50 years, at least 50, 60 years over time.
On and off.
On and off. Original well was back in the 70s. County's got records of it. Maybe that could be enough to, grandfather somebody like me. Yeah. And I drilled new wells in 2017. Now, I think it's easy to navigate my specific circumstance. I don't know how we do that out into the whole county.
I think Blake's comment of just saying that when farmers had intent to do the right thing by conserving or by waiting stigma out, not planting your whole ranch, even though it was leveled and there was well there. There's other examples like that. The intent, the appeal process, take that intent on. That's just that.
I think that's perfect.
I think that's much we could do because there's something going on.
Yeah, because I think to that point, Brad, the allowing an appeal process where that condition can be brought in front of the board for consideration is probably the best way, because you could also sense a situation of like, well, I didn't spend the money on the well either, but I plan to. I've just been a really good person and not even drilled the well or leveled the land yet. So I should be able to do the same thing Lou's doing. So you can see the domino effect if we're not careful. So the proving up of historic or some of those other conditions that Lou you're talking about are the things that we need to have a pathway for, and whether or not the board ultimately agrees with it, that's a board discretionary decision through an appeal process.
If it's an intent thing, selfishly, I think I can prove that case. I feel like everybody in this room could get on board with my specific. And I think if they're in front of other farmers and you say, look, was the farmer intending, were they being a thoughtful farmer here? And these are the things that the board can take into consideration. Historical usage, existing irrigation infrastructure, investment farmers. And they can take all those factors into consideration, the board can, and give a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Greg, would it maybe change? Because if someone is trying to essentially skirt the system that, as you described, and bring land into pumping, but then they just want to transfer it off to get the rest of their farming unit on that website, more water, maybe we could require this additional piece of property brought in be its own farming unit so that they can't transfer that water off. And they would actually have to farm that piece of land that they're trying to. Do you get what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think there's solutions to those kind of things. What we have to be, again, cognizant of is you got, 1,100 unique growers, and we don't want to have 1,100 unique appeal situations. And not saying that we are, that's a super extreme hypothetical, but I do think the situations to manage for that intent can be addressed through some appeal approach. I think in Lou's case that he just described there, and I'm sure every one of you have some other similar circumstance we could have described, there was an investment in irrigation lines and a replacement well, and that can be shown to help demonstrate the intent of the irrigating of that parcel potentially. And so now it's just a question of investing backwards in costs that other people have been paying to have irrigated land in order to get the flexibility that's offered under irrigated land. Or put another limit, if you don't want to pay as much, maybe there's a way to structure where you now limit to only that ground for that water, and so you can't pull it back like you just suggested. Like.
Yeah.
So.
I think that would help push us towards sustainability while, proving to be flexible with the growers.
I think the intent thing's perfect. And
Yeah.
you give a factor for the list of factors for the board to consider. You say, were they intending on, and these are the things to consider. That way you can't have me make the similar claims like rangeland being like, oh, I was intending to farm it. If none of the factors are present, there's no water infrastructure present, it hasn't been historically used,
Right.
blah, 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 blah. But I can think of other people where they've been fallowing ground, worried about sigma coming. And the fact that they've been responsible. It's hard, but the other people, fence line to fence line, are gonna get an APA.
I agree.
And these responsible people are gonna get killed.
The Crane family has, Crane bought this big 8,000 acre ranch, and through the years, they decided what to plant and what to not plant based on how much water they had.
Yeah,
The other thing to keep in mind is that if everybody, putting aside the situation when you hit a 2015 minimum threshold, we should be able to maybe maintain, the intent is to maintain the APA. So you essentially are having a sustainable yield number that's higher than another source. So put that aside for a minute and just take into consideration, everybody has to get down to sustainable yield. That entity, like you just described, Brad, has not overinvested and may be in a better place for maintaining what they're doing longer than somebody who planted wall to wall is now doesn't have enough water and has to start taking immediate action or near-term action to address that.
They take out a few rows though. They just take out a few rows of trees and they've got tons of more water.
Well, I mean, let's be honest that the APA with sustainable yield is 24 inches, and if you're consuming 30 some odd 36 on trees, you may have to pull out more than a few rows. You're negative right off the bat.
For the rest of the life of that land, full sustainable yield and potentially APA on wall to wall. Versus a ranch that's set aside 600-700 acres that they're not going to get APA or sustainable yield on.
Right.
The big difference in volume of water, and you times that by 300 acre foot, $300 an acre foot per year, forever, they're losing a bunch of value.
Well, there is no right answer. There's no, correct winning of an argument here on this point that you're making, Brad, but the alternative discussion point could be like, well, the reason why that land wasn't planted is because it wasn't good land and was going to cost too much. So it wasn't about balancing water. It was about managing.
Except for all the land around it is planted and has really
Well,
good.
I get that, but I guess my point is there might be other drivers. Like we didn't want to make the investment. We didn't have the money or whatever their purpose was. It wasn't to be a good steward of groundwater.
I brought it up. I mean, I didn't bring it up until it's in. The idea though is it would be covered through the recommendation of the intent and the appeals process. And I think that is going to have to be the way that something like that goes, because
I think it's subjective enough where people can.
evaluate it. It's all in the same family.
In my head, unless somebody else has different thought process, as you talk about the intent of what they were trying to do, and then you give factors for the board to consider.
From
Historical farming usage.
owned it in 1940 till now, this is what's been going on.
Right.
So
And
all of it,
But if you,
With in the county records, I bet you in the county records, some of it's called grazing.
so much for that,
But that's the issue,
yeah.
is if it's grazing, again,
I always go by what is really happening. Is it irrigated or not irrigated, not like what is happening with the county records.
But we have fields that we set aside. I don't change their classification in the assessor's office, because if we're doing crop rotation, then it's like,
Exactly.
maybe this field's not good because, maybe we don't have enough water that year, or because of the other crops that we're growing, it sits aside, but it still get all the buckets because it's not changed at the assessor's office. So in the situation that you're describing, if there's 8,000 acres and they're in theory doing rotating crops and different stuff, then, you would think that they would maybe have it as irrigated land because your value is higher and all, your taxes are gonna be higher. But you know what I'm
I'd
saying?
have to check to see if that was tax.
When you do your rotations, do you update your chemical permit though, to be that field was fallow this year or it didn't have a crop? Maybe we should be contacting a different section of the county.
No, see, that's a problem that I'm running into too, because we've had fields that I've left out in wheat in like the past 2 years where there's been a lot of rain and not irrigated them at all. Well, if I don't irrigate it this year, then I'm never gonna be able to qualify for a drip system in those fields. Because if you've had something that hasn't been irrigated for 3 years in a row, then the NRCS won't grant you anything.
Mhm.
So that's kind of working against the process as well, because if you're trying to conserve water and do the right thing by the farm, see, I feel like a pinball, like being slapped around between all these different agencies competing for their different solo purposes. And then it doesn't do any good for the farm or the crops because long-term, I'm not gonna be able to conserve water because I haven't irrigated. Well, that doesn't make sense, And so a lot of these little things that we're setting up right now end up being pitfalls down the road. And I know this because Madera's already down the road a couple years. And so,
Yeah, they've dealt with all this
Yeah.
stuff we're talking about. all
and
these
so,
appeals.
it's not helping the crops, it's not helping the farm. I'm still paying taxes on things that I'm not irrigating on as irrigated ground. They're still getting the revenue for it and I can't farm it. So it's just it's all falling back to the farmer in not a good way. And I'm hoping that somehow Merced can figure out some of these pitfalls so we don't repeat them in this county. And I don't necessarily know what the answer is because it's like too many government agencies and get rid of a lot of government agencies would be my answer, but that's probably not gonna happen. But some people are gonna have to be a little bit more flexible with the Sigma irrigated, not irrigated type things.
I think the board's on balance a really good job of setting a framework. And to the board's credit, they also, this entire time, they said, look, there'll be these one-offs, so we need to establish an appeals process.
Right.
I think, helping give the board guidance on what that could look like might be,
Right.
meaningful. But I do think the board, at least as frustrating as it is for all of us, because we all know we're gonna go through a ton of pain.
Mhm.
I think the board's done a pretty good job of
I think they've done a really good job in delaying the allocation until we have all these discussions.
yeah, I think that was
Because
good.
there, they jump in and they don't even have it figured out yet.
Right.
Right.
While they're sending bills to people.
Still the plane, well,
While in the air. It goes much better to build it on the ground.
right,
Look, right now, the board,
still feel like it's time.
we are.
Yeah.
We're on.
Yeah.
I think the board right now is giving it, you can get your classification with what you did with the ground between, I think, January 2015 to 2023 or something like that,
Right,
or 2022.
When it was classified during these times.
What is classified during those times? It's a bunch of-
Not what was actually happening.
Right, is can you say, hey, and they've always said that there will be an appeal process, so maybe we can give them guidance of like, look, during this appeal process, the technical advisory committee recommends that you
factor these,
factor these things in.
right,
Exactly what they want.
yeah.
Yeah.
They want that feedback from the city.
Instead of going to the board to appeal it, is there maybe like a staff person that can weed through some of these things and then bring it to the board? That way, if you have 500 people appealing this, then it kind of noodles out. Instead of all 500 of us standing up there and saying, look, here's my
Group
receipt.
them into similar situations so
Maybe.
that maybe framework could be adopted to what point you could start just checking things off and
Yeah,
go, okay, well, you would fall into this category. This
Right.
is what
or
happens.
just whittle it down, I don't know. I mean, because we're talking about all the one-offs and if there's too many one-offs, then we got problems with the rules.
That's right.
And so.
I don't
if
think
there's-
so. From what I've seen now, and what I'm hearing, I don't think there's gonna be that.
I don't think so.
I think we'll be okay.
I don't think there'll be that many one-offs.
No, then let's write a set of factors you know, based on maybe a few of the conditions that we see to factor in
Yeah.
and try and,
I think the first thing is we have to look into, Greg, I keep going back to what you said was, we're the GSA, not the county. And you know, like our GSA roles, you know,
Right.
are in the county. So maybe we need to just try and update our roles more accurately. That might, because that would eliminate, like McQuinn, we have 400 acres across many parcels that are just simply not categorized properly in the county. Whether it's the landlord's fault or the county's fault, who cares? We need just better data for us. And then we can figure out what they would have to pay in a backdated 218 payment or whatever to be equal with everybody who was properly categorized.
Right.
And why can't we just set that up as, hey, that's one way to address it? What do you think, Greg?
Yeah, let's kind of flavor it as an irrigation district has recognized accounts and data on all of its accounts, including things like a classification, a land use classification. The GSA is like the beginning stages of being a quasi irrigation or water district. Just use that model for a moment, and it's got, ultimately it should have its own sets of data and not rely on data from others. We don't have that yet. And so your points are correct. I think they're moving towards that, to where it does become more contained by the GSA. So we know, you know, I don't care what the assessor's office says, we as a GSA recognize that that land is X.
going back to
Again-
that, the NRCS could then follow up with the GSA instead of following up with the county or something like that to see if your parcels have been irrigated or whatnot. So, you know, it would distinguish the difference between, you know, because everybody's got a different
I
classification.
think if you give it to the landowner, then the landowner can present the evidence, you don't have to.
Everyone, with Google Earth now, it's really easy.
Yeah, you just have to back up.
Yeah,
Totally. It's not that hard to prove if you're doing it. Greg, I'll tell you this, in the Grand Affluent Water District which I manage, we did a 218, and there's 3 different rates that farmers get. They get a groundwater only rate, a surface water and groundwater rate, and a grazing rate. And in 2020, when we did the 218, we started off with the county classification to help guide it. But then we sanity checked it in the field. So every APN got a sanity check. And then every year we submit the classification to the county and the dollar amount. When we, you know, the board every year sets the rate, the 3 different rates, and then sends the dollar amount and the classification to the county for each APN. So it's controlled by the Grand Affluent, not by the county, as far as irrigated, not irrigated data.
Right. And as long as that's consistent with how the allocations are shared out and all those aspects, that's perfect.
It could be the same way.
Yeah, and I think
And many farmers come in the district and tell their story about how they have surface water. They don't, because the groundwater only rates, the 218 is to pay for a new canal, $20 million project. So it's like $84 compared to $30 if you are groundwater only, or if you currently have access to surface water. Some of them have their own turnouts with MID. So people came out of the woodwork and said, look, I got this little riparian right. I can go through my neighbor and I get it out of the Chowchilla River. I don't want to, I should pay 34. And then they went down. The county had nothing to do with this. It was all done at the district level. It is done. Every meeting we have somebody come in with a different circumstance.
It has to be done at the district level.
Yeah.
Because the circumstances are too broad, the county doesn't have the resources. And then ultimately, if the district's in control of making all these rules, they have to hold the data.
right, and just so a couple things I wanted to point out. I think those all make sense, and the GSA is working towards that. Needs to hire an executive director and needs to get staff, and all those things start to build over time. So with that in mind, one of the other craftings of all of this allocation policy is it's going to be revisited and adjusted where appropriate. Noting that we're not trying to make massive changes, but in the 5-year update cycle, so prior to the 2030 GSP that would have to be done for the basin, we'll be evaluating how things are moving along and what other adjustments may occur. So I think my point I'm trying to make with that is, let's look at this framework and the policy that's trying to come out of it and have an appeals process, knowing that we're going to continue to refine this and continue to improve upon it. It's not going to be right out the gate. And that also, that doesn't necessarily give everybody confidence probably, but that's why 2025 should be a test year and nothing really starts happening until calendar year 2026. So that will allow more of these things to get flagged and get addressed. And brought up in front for appeal, I would say.
I wanted to just make one comment while it's in my head. And this has to do with the need to reach out to individual growers with respect to this issue of how they're designated on land use, because that's going to affect their allocation. I think that the GSA itself should be putting out, for lack of a better word, a newsletter in the emails that they have that deal with all of the, kind of the burning issues at the time, whether it be the allocation policy or like we were talking about the designation by the assessor's office, or whether we're talking about irrigation policy. Was it what our next subject matter, the groundwater accounting platform? I mean, we should have a little a news flash that will tell the public, this is what you need to start thinking about and taking these actions, and that would, I think, assist in this process. We don't have anything like that at this time, do we?
So we have done some mailings. We need to a couple of things. You're absolutely right, Bob. More information needs to continue to get pushed out. Ashley has done some work to try and help get some of that, and had some materials where people could go take those and pin them up some places, and it had a QR code to try and learn more. I think there's an email blast list, but I'm not sure. And noting that a lot of growers are not sitting there checking emails for that kind of stuff. We need to find multiple pathways. So emails plus some hard copy mailings and other things, I think.
Or texting. I mean, you can have links on text that will give you the access to a GSA issue flyer. I mean, phone numbers are.
I would be sending just text stop to that one really fast. Quit sending me this.
I don't know. It's just something we should think about.
Your point is right on, Bob, that we need more avenues of communication. The TAC is one of those avenues. This isn't just a discussion with you as individuals. You guys are supposed to also be some of the liaisons outward. And I know that's not an easy task, and there's a lot of people that still none of us are able to reach. We got to find better ways and continue to find better ways to get that out to help with these issues you guys are raising about whether or not you got the right designation, for example, as a starting point.
Like Farm Bureau sends out an email once a week, every other week, something like that. But put a link in there. Hey, here's what's going on with groundwater, just so they can have access to it, because I think a lot of people, like we were talking about earlier, don't know what's going on. So maybe that's when you put out the hard mail first, say sign up, yada yada, and then keep refresher links coming through the Farm Bureau or whoever else.
I do have a question for you on that one, Larkin. Do you know how much the Farm Bureau membership covers the farming owners, operators in the county?
How much they cover them? Oh, like what's,
Like, does it represent 30%, 50%, 75% of the growers?
boy,
yes.
I have no idea.
We need to Brianne in here to answer that question.
Right.
And I only raise that because I know in some other places it's not as thoroughly participated within, and so people aren't getting the people who are getting the newsletters are also the ones getting the direct emails from the GSAs, and you're still missing people. So it's not easy to find that pathway to those folks, but yet important. So I wrote down link to Farm Bureau. I think we should investigate, see if we can create more opportunities to use that platform also.
All the farmers' phone numbers are at the county for your pesticide.
This is what Madera's.
Yeah, Madera has a newsletter every week
Yeah,
or every other
I'm
week.
getting my Madera stuff. I think they're folks that never signed up for it.
Maybe they'll grow there.
Yeah, but you guys are also getting all this stuff, so it's the people who aren't even getting the other information that are the ones who come forward and ask the questions. I never knew, I didn't, and where part of the question to you all is, what are those avenues? Is it, do we need to get some things posted up at a local coffee shop or I don't know where, what are the avenues? Are there some other things? Maybe it's,
Hello.
go ahead.
Email that or send a letter to the tax roll saying you're about to get 2 acre feet a year of water.
In red, big fat red letters.
Yeah.
Cause there's a lot of people that I talk to and I tell them what's going on. And they're like in denial, and you try to sit there and explain to them, and they just don't wanna listen. So I don't know that a letter is gonna fix it either, cause
Well,
either they're buying in or they're not.
Yeah, they've all heard about it.
Yes.
At some level, like we were talking about before, the sounds have been in there.
There's some people that aren't paying any
That have
attention.
never heard about it. They've never heard about it.
No, like every turn they go, but like some of the old timers, they're not.
And there's nothing we're gonna be able to do.
Yeah, that's fair.
And to that point, recall that one of the reasons for the 5-year bucket is to also give some people that flexibility where maybe they haven't heard anything. We're not reaching out. They're also able to borrow ahead a little bit through their bucket to get to survive, I guess, for a period of time while they get better informed and figure out the next steps. So we can't address every issue and every person who's not paying attention and try and handle all those situations. We just need to do as best we can and give as much flexibility as we can. And the appeals, to your point, you guys have said this several times, some input from the TAC on the appeal process should consider intent, and these are the kinds of circumstances that a grower would need to represent to demonstrate some level of intent. That kind of list would be very helpful to come from TAC as advice to the board.
When you guys are talking about appeals, you're just talking basically about irrigated versus not irrigated. Is
Yeah,
there-
land has it wrong, or if the GSA has. So,
Are there gonna be other things?
Yeah, Larkin, to that point, we've already identified about, 10 or so, ranging from the land use classification to the calculation of sustainable yield APA, which is, based on gross acres of a parcel. Some designations that may come out about above and below Corcoran clay, questions and your determinations of that. Your transactions, there might be appeals about a transaction in or out of water or land in or out of an account, like you might lease land or do some of those actions. Limitations on carryover, appeal about monitoring, appeal about opting in, appeal about any fines that would come into the future. So there's several items we're flagging as will need appeals. We may not have them all established yet, but we should get them established within the next 6 months.
I feel like we should probably make an agenda item to visit in the future to firm up some of these.
The next the next one.
Yeah, what we,
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful if TAC could provide input to the board about what are circumstances for intent related to maybe just that land use classification and that initial part of the framework, as well as into the future. You know, you guys aren't going away anywhere, so you can continue to provide input on a lot of topics.
Are there other things we should consider? I mean, I've got a vested interest in the land use one, so I'm gonna bring you guys a very defined, thoughtful approach on the next meeting. But are there other things we should be considering for other appeals other than the land use classification?
Well, all those that Greg was listing.
He just moved too fast.
Oh, what I got, a couple of them. I
Well,
think that-
yeah, and we're
Probably-
framing this stuff. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm talking over you, Brad.
Calculation of sustainable yield and APA. But not necessarily the calculation of, but when you opt in, who gets it, who doesn't, things like that.
I think it should be calculation of sustainable yield.
Is that if the
Well,
gross acres are miscounted? Is that the?
Well, I think what I'm thinking about there is, if you have a parcel like yours where you don't get APA,
I am gonna get it. Anyway, go ahead.
technically you don't, but you appeal to get it.
Right.
That is where you're
I think that, if I
appealing.
could say something real quick. That the calculation of the sustainable yield would be important because there's some of us that have significantly higher sustainable yields than we're gonna be given credit for. And that would be a very important appeals process for some of us.
I agree.
The
So-
hope. is
Can,
when
can
they-
I drill into that one for a minute? 'Cause I assume that was Scott, I think.
Yeah,
It's pretty sad that I can over the phone start to figure out who everybody is, right?
Just by their bitch.
That I want to make sure we're clear, Scott, also in that your total bucket of water will have these allocations of native groundwater and an APA plus other buckets associated with other sources of water you have.
yeah,
And
but I mean, I just think like, if like. Our wells have been consistent over the last, we've been pumping water since the 40s and the depth of groundwater doesn't change that much.
I think
And
that,
it comes right back, and there's something different about our area than other people's area, just a few miles down the road. And if we can show that our wells will maintain the depth of groundwater that's required, why can't we pump more? And shouldn't that process where,
And I think this is where we get into all sorts of legal questions and hydrogeologic questions that there is no answer for. One of the things I think you and I have talked about before is you have a seepage agreement, is that right?
yeah,
So that
So,
is, because all of us.
but
have
not
one.
everyone has one.
right, I get that, and that Larkin's in a different situation.
It's the rest of my-
Yeah, and so there's pathways where I think we can find through recharge or seepage and stuff that the equivalent water is there and recognize that water is in part because of added water into the San Joaquin River that is seeping into your land and towards your wells. And so that's why you have that recognition.
I think you've got to also recognize that, when Bryant went in, our stretch of the river has been dry this whole time until like 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
even that being said, that kind of to me proves that there's no interconnected surface water if there was no surface water for like 60 years and our wells are still at the same levels. So, seepage and water in the channel aside, if we're still steady, shouldn't there be some kind of appeal process for that? Like, because it's unnecessarily taking all of our area down, like the 6 farmers around us, for really no reason when actually we have a little bit higher sustainable yield than the rest of the people to our east.
Hey, Greg, let me add to the question.
Yeah.
I think also, I think you guys are both in sustainable zone 4. the El Nido Triangle.
Right,
Yeah.
I mean, we're all lumped in with all.
They're,
the-
they're all lumped in, which.
Five.
Five.
Yeah.
Is the. Do you think that the subsidence study that's being done now will inform their situation? Because I think they're likely above Corcoran,
Yes,
and everything done in that area is about below Corcoran. If you look at all the wells in that area, I guarantee you they're all 600 feet plus, the good ones. So there is the subsidence study gonna also inform this scenario?
and if we could have a different allocation for above than our neighbors that are pumping below, because we're not contributing to subsidence and our groundwater's constant in depth of groundwater. And we
I
can
think
prove
you'll have
that. What's that?
By my read, I don't know anything about that area, but by my read of the board, you're definitely gonna get a different allocation above.
The exchange contractors and Triangle T and their mitigation agreement, the exchange contractors don't care what happens above. They care what happens below, very much. They're down to like
600.
0.5, yeah, 6 inches. So 6 inches below, unlimited above. In that scenario, you guys,
But that's gonna drive everybody to put wells in above Corcoran Clay.
Oh, I'm
but
sure.
you're not causing subsidence.
Yeah. Yeah, so,
Right.
I mean, if you line it all up, like, our wells are above the clay, so we're not causing subsidence. For 60 years, our groundwater wells were steady and there was no interconnected surface water. So those are two of the big things. You know, there's no domestic wells that are above the Corcoran clay. Almost all of them are below the Corcoran clay, so we're not drilling anybody dry domestically. So I'm wondering, what other factors do we have to abide by? Obviously, if there's no seawater intrusion.
I think the thesis is if you guys are maintaining the groundwater level, your APA will go up over
The
time.
problem is though, is they want the whole sustainability zone.
That's what yeah, so
That's what we need an appeal.
And the subsidence study should help define and maybe
you guys should get a
establish.
monitoring well on your
Yeah,
property.
The worry is that those like Larkin and Scott get pulled down by the rest of the zone.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, 4 or 5 other members of our water district. So it's not,
Right.
it's not Scott and I, it's pretty much everybody out there.
No, I
So-
get, I
Yeah.
totally get that. And I think there's Chris and I think have chatted about this a little bit. If I recall, we're not going to try and answer that now, but I think there's something we can look at. What we have to be careful of is we're talking about sustainable yield of native groundwater and an APA, which is essentially an allowance to continue to overpump over some period of time. As we get more and better data, those circumstances might start to shift more across those zones. Your circumstance in the meantime has a potential need and a desire to at least appeal in some way to get recognition that something unique is happening for that area that is not happening in other parcels within that zone. And is there a way we can do that through a recharge policy or other things that can be demonstrated? And I'm going to go to Lou's point of kind of intent. There's a seepage agreement that Scott has, but Larkin, you don't, and maybe some others don't. You've indicated you talked to the Bureau about that, and they said we're not doing anymore. Equivalent, and I might be
That's pretty close.
stating that wrong, but that kind of intent to say, look, I tried, my neighbor has one, I don't because the Bureau said no, but I have these conditions. Here's my groundwater well. Does that get to the kind of intent aspect that's also being considered in thinking about the land use classification? Possibly. And so I think we just have to find some pathways for that without setting it up so we have 1,100 unique allocation situations. Because then we might as well just go to the court and adjudicate the basin.
Well, I mean, you know, I guess that would work maybe for me because I'm along the San Joaquin River, but the rest of my neighbors aren't along the San Joaquin River, so that wouldn't even be an option for them. So, you know, if they don't river, then the seepage deal isn't a factor.
So then the
And-
question is, well, where is their water coming from that's maintaining that? Is it native yield that's flowing subsurface laterally? And if so, where's it coming from?
Well, it'd be the San Joaquin River, but that doesn't mean that they're gonna get an extra bucket from seepage or even have that option. So,
Right, so they're getting water from the San Joaquin River and they're further east than you are from the river, right?
no, not necessarily. They just don't butt up to the river like we do. So we're a little bit wider and, they're along the Fresno River, along the bypass and places like that. So, the recharge policy, that's a whole separate issue to me because, whether we were sustainable or not with our native yields, it's a whole different animal as far as the recharge goes. I mean, we'd do that if we could. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm not, and so I'm gonna give a hypothetical, but I'm not trying to represent this as your situation. So Larkin, I understand there's some things we have to figure out. We're not gonna answer it here today. I think we need to think about how, if that's an appeal aspect and how to bring that forward, and if TAC wants to make a recommendation in some way and to help inform this. But that said, my hypothetical is I'm right by the river. Brad's 5 miles in from the river. My well levels are not going down and I keep pumping heavy. His levels keep going down because I'm taking water that otherwise was flowing towards him. In correlative water overlying rights, I'm not allowed to do that. I have to share equally. That's a hypothetical representation, very, very simplistic. So the questions about, my level is still going to show really relatively stable, but Brad's is continuing to lower. Does that give me the right to keep pumping more to his detriment? That is not the way the law looks at it right now, as it's a correlative basin. So again, very, very simplistic, and I'm not trying to say that that's your circumstance. What we need to say is what is your circumstance, and is there a way to represent that that's that doesn't create the similar situation for somebody in zone 4 to say, well, I can make that same argument. And now we got a whole bunch of situations popping up that everybody's got their unique appeal and we end up with 1,100 allocations.
Well, I mean, it would be an administrative nightmare for y'all, but if there was 1,100 different allocations, I think it'd be fine because then you're in control of whatever you're doing and you can, you're responsible for your own stuff. If you pump in, you're lowering the groundwater levels around there, then you need to figure that out. But I can't control everybody that's around me. The only thing that I can control is how much we pump, how much we leave out, how conservative our water crops are. And so if I can provide well data that's showing that we're stable, I don't know why that wouldn't be applicable in this situation to appeal something. And even if that goes across 1,100 people, I mean, if they're showing that they're sustainable, then again, it kind of goes back to maybe some of these rules are wrong.
Well, yeah, and all we're trying to do is find a less administrative burdensome way than going into a water master and a court adjudicated where every 1,100 parties are all parties to an adjudication independently. That's where we're trying not to go. So first off, Larkin, I totally understand, and we're trying to, and I mentioned it, I'm pretty sure Chris and I talked about this, and maybe Chris can confirm that it wasn't just an imagination of mine, but I think we were talking about a pathway and seeing what might work, and if there's places where we can figure that out for your unique circumstances that don't affect your APA, essentially doesn't change the way it might have to elsewhere, or you have another bucket that's designated. We don't have that answered right now.
Yeah. I figure I feel like my ranch is like the Gordian knot of the whole situation, being that it's got all the circumstances that it does. It's split by the counties. Like, I mean, it's pretty much got everything. So if we can figure that out, I think that pretty much all the rest of it should be fairly easy from this point on,
So just note that we're aware, we're trying to figure it out. let's not, I'm not trying to dismiss the issue. I'm trying to say that there is something we have to figure out how it's gonna fit right as we're drafting some of this stuff.
So I guess my question would be like for an appeals, if we could provide enough data to appeal to the board that we actually are sustainable and have been for 80 years, then, I mean, do you consider that a one-off? Or is that just actual scientific data that the board would recognize?
Greg, maybe the way to proceed is to have everybody in the TAC do some homework and try and come up with something that they can email over to Ashley so we could put it on the agenda for discussion. And the point of sending it to Ashley for the next meeting is so that all the other board members can get it when she sends out our agenda. And then we can come in and try and work through some of these actual items. What do you think?
I think that sounds great.
Greg, rattling off a whole list of potential appeals issues, and that's, I can't write. So
Yeah.
I would really like to have that, plus anything else that come in the conversation
Right.
today.
Maybe we should all, maybe Ashley could get all that correlated for us and email it out, and we can think about it over the next couple of weeks.
And then reply.
Greg, because I'm impatient, could you, rename, I'm too impatient for Ashley. Would you mind renaming the list of things that you can think of that should be addressed with a formal appeals procedure by the board?
So what I listed off before is part of a working draft that one of the ad hoc boards committees is working on. So this is just kind of complete work in progress and maybe missing or may have things that shouldn't be on here. So I want that caveat well understood. One of the first ones was incorrect land use classification, which we talked about, and we've said that. Let me go first back to the framework. The framework said appeals associated with existing irrigation systems that cross sustainability zones or GSA boundaries, where sustainable yield or APA may be adversely impacted. So that was one that's in the framework from back in February. The land use category is determined by the assessor's office. A change in ownership and effect on the allocation and limitations on the subject parcel. That was another item that was flagged. The application of historic groundwater conditions when compared to the current groundwater conditions. And I would classify that as a kind of a catch-all, which would include Larkin's condition.
Yep.
And how to appeal that. So those are in the public version of the framework. We're starting to craft this other document, and we are laying out a few other things about limitations on use, limitations on transactions that are being discussed amongst the ad hoc, and that transactions relate to, I'm going to lease a parcel to you and you get some chunk of water with that lease. How much do you get? How much do you not get? Those are important things that we need to recognize. And if there may be appeals associated with that. Appeal associated with monitoring, an appeal associated with opting in and how that process works. An appeal associated with the potential limits on above or below Corcoran pumping, which EKI is continuing to work. As you guys know, in the public setting, they've been directed to work on some considerations for that. And so they are still working on that. And so there may be an appeal process about whether or not that was inappropriately applied to a parcel. Fines and enforcement. So there's going to need to be appeals processes around those. Though I'm guessing several of these may not even be drafted up until later this fall or even winter, because they're probably less of a driver for the decision to adopt the main components of a framework and the allocation policy and the number. Does that help?
Yes. For monitoring, I'm assuming it has to be somebody who doesn't want to go through open PT.
Right. Yeah, monitoring on that. There's also going to be monitoring we're gonna have, monitoring is gonna be, gonna have a methodology, it's gonna have data sources such as remote sensing, potential data sources like flow meters. Well, what's that process? There's going to be something that has to address CAFO operations or potentially even production facilities on lands that are zoned as ag. Like you might have a processing facility sitting on part of a land that has a consumption with it. You know, a perfect example would be Mike's cheese operation. He's not sure if it's zoned separately as its own unique parcel or whether it's, and if so, if it's zoned ag or if it's zoned industrial. So there's some of those things that that are gonna have to be dealt with as far as monitoring. And all of that is work in progress.
I'm pretty anxious to get to number 6, Greg.
Yeah, sorry, and I'm like lost on our time. How far, are we way over already?
Could I say, bring up one other thing that, I did after last meeting last month or so, the Open ET, I went and looked at Open ET and I found that very informative. I do see that, like some places that I know I haven't irrigated, the ET on my winter crop is, higher than the rainfall. And I don't know if that it was brought up, possibly fog has some effects on that and, other things. So how do we figure out, how are you folks gonna figure out, like cover crops and stuff like that so that we don't get dinged for planting cover crops? When, I think the fog out there where we are has a big effect
Huge.
on that.
To be determined, but your points are well taken, that there are questions. I'll just give by example, in some other GSAs, they're down the valley, even down into the Bakersfield areas and stuff, they have essentially an error bar that's associated with numbers. We're gonna have to come up with a process or an agreeable process on how much effective precip we want and how we will calculate that. And let me capture your point of fog within effective precip. It's essentially naturally available moisture that's being consumed, as opposed to applied water that's being consumed. And trying to make sure we separate that out. We have work to do on that, and we're, you know, I don't know what else to say, but that point is you're right. In 23, I think 2023 data is the OpenET folks are actually looking, the scientists behind some of that are looking at it closely because it did create some interesting anomalies related to precip and ET signatures that were going well into the summer on some crops that they wouldn't have expected. And so there's, you know, more understanding and refinement of those tools that are going to continue into the future. Did that help, Scott?
Yeah, thank you. Just as long as you're working on it, because there's, I mean, the numbers don't add up that are on
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
And that might be a case where you decide, and we'll have a method where you can use a meter and there's a subtraction then off, because again, we're worrying about consumption. So there's some efficiency application determined. You have to certify that your meter is calibrated and installed correctly so that it, you know, meets those requirements. And we know, because meters have their own error, plus they can get installed incorrectly and be significantly off. So we just have to find the right path.
I don't mind the OpenET approach. I looked at that and I thought that the numbers on there, I thought it was pretty good. But the places that don't get irrigated, maybe that have a cover crop or that have a wheat crop,
Yeah.
we chose not to irrigate them for a season. They're higher than I expected.
And
Higher
maybe your point
rainfall.
might need to be through the control and the platform, which is kind of a good segue to the platform. that, is there a way for the grower to designate that, you know, essentially under penalty of perjury, that this parcel was not irrigated? And so it kind of just gets, regardless of what the signature is, it isn't going to inadvertently get included against some of your bucket. And maybe there's a way to do it that way.
Keep it simple. I think that's a simple way, and people know, you can tell. You can tell, yeah. You can tell if it's been irrigated or not. Neighbors know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep it simple.
It'll just be if you have access to surface water, making sure they can account for that in their bucket somehow. And then I know.
So let's transition to item 6, because Blake was really excited about moving there, I think, right?
Yeah, did Ashley forward you a letter I sent to the GSA?
Yes.
When we got access to it?
And so first I want to say thank you to you, your dad, and Mike, and whomever else spent a fair amount of time looking at that in detail. Those were passed along to the development team, and we're talking with them about some of those elements. One of the, you know, first we have to recognize this platform is getting, is intended to be used through many different GSAs, including MSGSA. But up and down the state, and East Turlock is getting ready to roll it out also, that platform, later this fall. And they're the first non-piloted, essentially they're paying their way to participate, where we are participating through a grant that DWR has funded that development team. So we've been part of that piloting, which has been beneficial. We're getting a lot of services for no cost. So we appreciate all that input. There, you know, it's going to have its limits. It's going to not serve every function. It's also probably going to be something that, as we all spend more time with it, everybody becomes more comfortable with it. And we are going to need to have instructional videos, workshops, and other things to help people learn and navigate it as best we can. And so Ashley, I know, was talking about how to move through some of those and creating some videos and other things like that that could be helpful and available for people to just watch. So again, all of your comments were very insightful and useful. We may not be able to address them all, just due to the broader limitations.
Pretty good list.
Yeah, it was a pretty good list.
What did you think of it? I haven't seen it, like.
I hesitate to give my honest opinion because I don't want to weigh everybody a certain direction. I think it's a really good start, would be my feedback. I think it has a long way to go. But if it's, Greg, I don't know when we're rolling this out to the public. My understanding is it's extremely soon. My biggest feedback would be to hold off on that if any of the user-friendly ability could be improved upon, because in its current iteration, it's extremely user-unfriendly. And I foresee it going to go similar to like the dairies, where they just pay people to keep their website up for them. And we all know how that rolled out. Basically, they're just paying to get their numbers massaged, and then the DWR gets happy and we all go home. All this or not, if the website is, you know, not going to be able to be useful. And the average, the average individual that I foresee trying to work this website needs to log in and see a big green button I can pump, or a red button I need to stop. And it's, in its current iteration, you have to log in and see your map as a farm. And that was beautiful, Greg, by the way. I mean, I was able to
I take no credit for that. That's all. That's all.
But whoever needs to get credit for that, make sure they get it, because that worked. Like, I was able to adopt it with the pin you guys gave me. My parcels were all there and accurate. That was great. But the map being able to where you have to scroll over it and click on each individual parcel, let's make sure that we push back to the team, the development team. Go take a page out of the OpenET website where they just scroll over it and their ETs pop up. Let's pop up with our summary page in that little window would be the biggest helpful thing to do. Because right now, I think I only have 10 parcels, And I have to click on each parcel, go to a different web page, and then, oh, go to the back button and then go to the, you're lost. And I've only got 10 parcels.
Right, and I think that can happen at the gross level also, but I hear your point. It's gonna continue to iterate and get improved upon, and the easier the better. You know, we want that easier button, that big red button.
Right.
But we're trying to balance a couple of things here. The opportunity where you can pick all your parcels, make sure you have those locked in, and then we can, as the GSA, be able to say, all right, we're monitoring your bucket against the parcels you flagged you're operating together. And so it's trying to facilitate some of that. So there's the value to the GSA about monitoring. But I do believe that there's an overall view that you can look at your entire, instead of parcel by parcel or field by, field parcel level, whatever.
The user friendliness of it, I wasn't able to find it easily. I think I stumbled on it a couple of times, but when I went looking for it, I couldn't find it.
So it might be there, it's just not easily found.
Yes, that could, it's not where you expect it to be. It might make sense to the developer, but to the farmer who's trying to learn it, it needs to be changed a little bit. Oh man, I just had a thought of where I wanted to go with that.
Does it have accounting, like, I mean, is the accounting part of it simple, or like,
Well,
how much water you have left in this
No,
bucket?
not at all.
Okay.
The buckets are there and they all make sense, but the data that's in it right now is a presentation example.
Got it.
So I wasn't able to relate to that in my mind, so I couldn't wrap my head around it. What every farmer in our area wants to be able to do is log in, like I say, and see if they can pump. Well, here's the problem. Everything's measured in ET, and they want to go look at their meter on their well and go, I can run X amount of acre feet through this well. And I know that is like an impossible calculation to make, but that's what they need. That's what the farmer needs. And I feel if the website can't answer that question, what are we doing?
I don't think it's that a possible calculation to make, and they have all that, they have that map.
They know they're fit.
I mean, the efficiency, see, I don't actually, I mean, when I went through, okay, let me put it this way. What is the average farmer's efficiency with flood irrigation? Do we have I've heard 50 to 60%.
Yeah, that's just 60%.
So when my dad and I added up all of our stuff with we've got it down every surface acre foot and all of our wells for the last 3 years. We were at 84% efficiency on flood irrigation.
Cause you got big heads of water, you're pushing.
Well, we have big heads of water, we push it across the ground. I don't even have return systems, I don't have return drains, and my water leaves the bottoms of my fields within 3 hours. Like, I've got it down to a gnat's ass. I don't know anybody else that operates that way in our area. But then I compare that to my drip irrigation systems, and they're upwards, 90-95% efficiency typically is a number.
All that should show up in your open ET numbers.
Well, I flood and sprinkler the same fields when it's my almonds. I do both, and that's not accounted for. So I've got my drip irrigation systems pulling up some of my overall flood. So
The platform is not gonna do everything.
I know that, but that goes to how hard that question is calculated.
Right.
The farmer doesn't know their efficiency number nearly as well as everyone thinks they do, and everybody's a little different in each parcel. So that's
the beauty of the open ET.
Cause then it doesn't.
The over irrigation that goes back in the aquifer.
It's
you
just
don't
not
get
real
dinged.
time. It's just not real time. That's
Right.
the issue that you're.
Yeah, and that's so at that point, Greg, my feedback on the system is going to be, and for the whole GSA, are we trying to deal with the farmer on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or a seasonal basis? Because really, a plant is going to need X amount of water to grow no matter what. I don't care how you apply it.
The GSA cares about it on an annual basis, and maybe Larkin can provide a little bit of insight into the challenges of another tool that was being used on a Madeira, and she's probably squirming right now. I can't see her. that has challenges, is trying to be improved, but it was designed to be essentially an almost weekly or daily tool to growers called Earwatch. And that was leaning more towards the growers benefit than the GSA benefit. This probably leans more towards the GSA benefit, looking on an annual, it helps you kind of see things on a monthly time step. But we're really worrying about the GSA, looking at how much you're using on an annual basis. And there's a
So
lot of space between them.
To that point, I guess, if all we expect from the farmers to be in compliance is that they just change how much they plant every year, and that's how they control their pumping, rather than trying to change their efficiency and, much of anything else. I foresee the website being used to plan the next year.
Yes,
That's what we do with people. That's all
And
we do.
yeah.
and that's gonna be the hard part. So conveying that to the farmers of, hey, you're not gonna have a green or a red button that you can pump. You're simply going to decide, based on last year's performances, next year, you will only plant this much acreage. And I think that's what we need.
Carry over.
Yeah, that's what we have to utilize out of that website. I think that's kind of a good summary of my experience from it so far. And I think that using the buckets with the APAs gives everybody a couple of years to figure that out. So that's my assessment of the website. What do you have to say about it?
I think the Erie Watch system is almost, sounds like opposite of what you're describing. There are no buckets, there is no total, there isn't anything. Madera County sends us out a sheet once a year saying this is how much water you use, this is how much water you got left, and that's it. So,
Yeah.
in my mind,
Well, you can log into Earwatch.
yeah, of course, and you can see how much you've used and whatnot and do the math and deductions, but it's not like you're saying it's not real self-explanatory. It's like, this is how much. No, but it also doesn't say what my total, squirreled up amount of water is, or how much is sustainable yield, or there's no separation of buckets. It generally just shows you the ET, and that's it. And then there's other like farmable factors on there that are kind of cool, how much nitrogen and all kinds of stuff. And so as farm wise, like that's okay. It's on a daily basis. It's behind, so you can't schedule your irrigation ahead of time. But I use like, soil moisture sensors to try and do that. So I guess that's maybe more a factor of how you farm instead of what the accounting platform is going to provide.
Right.
But if I was going to design something, I don't know if you guys are East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
their website's pretty simple. I mean, it's got one spot for documents. Okay, you upload your documents. It's got your checklist of the stuff that you need to upload for in this case, it'd be the GSA, if you have water rights or it purchased surface water or something like that, then you can put it in there. So it's a document, place that both the county or the GSA and the farmer can look at. So everything's there. You got your checklist of what you would need.
Right.
And then showing actual ETA on a daily basis, but then, you would be able to maybe pull what bucket you're using that from. And so it would be calculating like a bank account, more as it's happening instead of.
You hit it on the head with bank account.
Yeah,
That's
like-
what everybody.
Like a QuickBooks type thing,
That's what everybody wants to see is bank account. And Mike said that, and I was working with his daughter as well, looking through it because she does all the computer stuff for him. And bank accounts.
I think that's how they sold this.
And that's how it's being set up. And I think there are views, and I apologize, I have not played around in it much. I have a login, but I haven't even set parcels or anything to try and claim anything because I don't actually own any land down there.
It didn't have the same feel as when I log into the bank. The bank, you log in, you see it. This one, you had to go to each individual parcel to pull up the bank account of that.
And that's interesting because I'm looking at kind of like their front page of their just, welcome to our platform thing. And they're showing this example, Big Red Tomato Farms, and it's got multiple parcels. And then it has a cumulative view of all of those parcels.
Yeah.
as a value. So I think there's,
To be able to group those parcels further by crop. Because I treat my 5 alfalfa fields the same, I treat my 4 almond fields the same. And I'm unique in that everything is contiguous, all my parcels touch, so my soil and I treat everything's the same. So they might as well be
well,
one.
I guess it may not be able to do everything we want it to do.
Yeah.
So we're gonna find that balance, and I think one of the things about the reason for trying to get it out soon is so people really can start looking at, grabbing their parcels, trying to see what their historic use is, understanding that, see how this kind of works, give us this feedback that we're seeing, so that the conversation about the allocation, the 13 inches and the 11 inches of APA as a starting point, have some relevance to what they'd see when they looked at their ground right now. And not how the allocation would track, but more about, hey, I'm using 30 inches right now. Geez, 24 is going to be tough. Or I'm using 22. Okay, 24 is going to be okay for right now. And I know it's going to change, and all those kind of challenges. And so that's really why we want to get it out there, to help the conversation. And going back to Scott's point, you played with OpenET. There's a whole bunch of people who have not. And we want them to get a sense of what consumption looks like. So it's helping frame these values that are going to be adopted.
When it's released, are we going to be populating the buckets with the actual numbers?
No, not until the 2025 trial period.
Let me give you this example, Greg. We logged in, my dad said, "What the hell's a CSV file? I'm done with it," and walked away. He was so just, "I don't understand this. I'm not interested. This is your problem." And where the average farmer is going to be right now.
Well, that's our
Yeah.
six, right? And then now you're getting deeper with the accounting platform. It's really like, oh yeah, whatever.
I
Yeah.
seriously had to force myself to go through that thing, and I spent 10 hours with it, between explaining it to our board member president, and he came up with some examples. He looked at it and was like, "I don't get it, whatever. Can it do this? Can it do that?" So, I don't know. So
Right.
in its current iteration and how it was released to the board members, I highly caution you releasing it to the public. That'd be my feedback.
I haven't seen it for a couple of years, but what was it? What was that? Was that a year and a half ago? I don't
I don't even know.
Yeah.
I've heard it came a long way.
What's that?
Would have thought we would have reconvened before.
I didn't even know it was back out there. I guess I wasn't paying close attention, so I should get back in there, but it was a mess.
So were you downloading the CSV files for each?
No,
Or
my dad was reading through the website, perusing, and it's like, "Oh, you can download." And he's like, "What the hell is a CSV?"
Yeah.
Like, is this? I'm like, "That's a terminology. It's computer terminology, Dad. Anybody who, wait a minute. No, not anybody who's farming is going to know what a CSV is." And if
Right.
that is the limitation, that's the clientele we're trying to get to utilize this webpage.
Market.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
That's the miss of the mark of the website is what I see.
To your point earlier, though, like, I don't understand, if you got a map of your farm and you've got fields 1 through 10 and all the even ones are alfalfa, why can't you click all the even ones and say, okay, I'm gonna group these? And,
Have you gone to OpenET?
no, I
Okay.
do the Erie Watch thing.
It's just super neat how you just scroll over them and it populates with the summary and you can just see it as you scroll along.
Yeah,
This one you have to you click on the field, it populates, and then you click another little link, and then it loads a new website and you see the summary of that parcel.
gotcha.
Well, I want to see the next parcel right next door. Back.
Everybody
Move over.
down by hand.
Yeah, and you're just like, I can't just see everything. Why? OpenET has a very nice, useful presentation.
The Erie Watch, I guess, probably has that, right? It's similar to OpenET or no?
AeroWatch is using another remote sensing input.
But as far as like scanning over the parcels, you could see what there is and what there isn't, and
I do
it's.
not have an AeroWatch account, so I would not be able to tell you that, Larkin.
Yeah, it's just like you're trying to see this is an alfalfa field, that's an alfalfa field, and that's all. I can't look at all 3 of those and just go, okay, this one's good. No,
Right.
you have to look at each one, and then by the time it's like, this
Exhausting.
isn't user friendly. I'm done. This isn't helping. I'm out. I got to go to work.
Right.
The challenge is, are we using this? This is not being intended for you as a water management tool, but as a tracking against an allocation tool.
Right, and so that's.
your expectation.
They may
It's not a
need
water
to,
management.
but I'm
But
the,
it has to
but I'm
be.
the person that is being presented to use this, so
Right.
that's what I'm trying to point out is. We need to make sure that we release that with that.
But your
as
bank
a-
account doesn't tell you how to farm or how to spend money. It's just an accounting tool.
True, but that's not how this was sold to us to log in to try it.
Is that why
So-
mine has negatives in it all the time, Brad? Is
What's that?
that why mine's always negative in my banking summary?
I mean, at some level, you know, that is what you do with the bank. account. You log in, you see it, you go, now that check hasn't cleared yet, I can't do this. So I get it, but the average farmer of what they're expecting this website to do, that's what's being
We
expected. of it.
maintain
So-
the Madera County account for 4 or 5 different farmers. And in the end, it comes down to a planning tool in the late winter about what they're gonna plant this coming year.
Right,
Once a year, you go back and you look at it and then you know what you're gonna plant.
But that's now while water is
So
abundant, gonna be in the.
And we had a good winter. It helps.
Exactly, so when it gets down here to 12 inches, 13 inches, and that's all you got,
So
then
are you
it's gonna need
do
to
you wanna
be,
look every week and see how much allocation you have left?
yeah, I mean,
That's not gonna, that's gonna be tough.
I look at every time I pay bills, how much money's in the account. So if I'm gonna run water, then I need to know how much I got. So it really kind of does
But
need to
you
be a little bit of
you
a
gotta
water
run the
management.
water whether your plant's there. If your plant is there, you're gonna run the water and pay any fine to keep it alive.
But I
But
may
like with
not, you know,
alfalfa.
I mean, with wheat, like maybe we won't irrigate it
Or cut it early.
or cut it
Cut it
early. or-
If you run out of water, then you could cut it early.
Exactly, or the hay, okay, well, I don't have enough for one last irrigation, bring in the sheep, you know what I'm saying? So there's different management tools for different
I don't
crops.
know,
So this data though also is a month behind because that's how
at least a
Yeah.
month.
You're at least about-
functioning.
the satellite's a month behind.
Well, I mean,
In a
Erie
really
Watch
good
is daily,
situation.
so it's possible that it could be daily. It's just the problem with the Erie Watch is it doesn't deduct how much you've used or anything.
I think you said Aerowatch, a different sensor monitoring.
AeroWatch is using a company that has access to Japanese and European remote sensing also. OpenET is getting access to some of those to maybe improve its fly from 7-day to a 3-day. But even AeroWatch is interpolating between those fly days of 3 or 4 from those other satellites.
Well, I mean, it's better than an annual basis or even a monthly basis. I mean, if we water our hay once a month, then I would know what to do in October or not, you know?
There's
I
so
maybe-
so
You know,
in the interest of time, because I think we're well past our mark with you guys here. And this has been great input and conversation. This is what we wanted to be able to talk about. This groundwater accounting platform is going to it's going to have challenges. It's going to need a lot of hand holding by the GSA. And we're going to have to take the various steps to help people work through it. Some people are going to do exactly like your dad, Blake, and just say, forget this. That's also why, we're going to have this I'm going to call it a trial run because calling it a dry run doesn't sound very good from a hydrologic perspective. That was pointed out yesterday by one of the board members.
Logistics.
A trial run in 2025 of how you might be looking against an allocation and your other buckets, then how you might start to use that. And I think people will continue to get more comfortable with it, and we'll continue to help the platform make changes. The guy from the platform actually called me during our meeting right now, and I just replied back I could call him here in a little bit.
I don't play.
Give them my number if they want it.
I will.
Greg,
Just say, hey, talk to Blake.
Greg, just kind of going one step further on the files, these CSV files, that when you did download them, the data would run across on a row, month by month by month, and you'd have various numbers, and you had to pick out the actual consumptive use in acre feet, rather than each month being aligned on the side of the page, and then having the 4 categories that they were giving you, so that you could have all your consumptive numbers come to the bottom and could sum them up. So it was very, very user friendly. And I was trying to truth up the numbers they had for consumptive against the 2023 consumption numbers that we had by meter deliveries. So they could pass that along too.
George, you're not an expert on pivot tables?
No,
That's all right, neither am I. Yeah, so I think there's several things that we got to continue to make the tool valuable for what it is intended to do, but also get recognition that it's not intended to be like a irrigation management tool.
That's the first time I've understood it to be that. Greg,
They sell it. I think their delivery of expectations is poor, because after I got in, I kind of concluded this is a retroactive tool
yeah,
that you're gonna use for planning for future years. But when you talk to them, I mean, I spoke with them, I don't know, it feels like forever ago, a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And they sell it like, oh, this will tell you real time and you'll be able to change your.
I've never even talked to them or anything. All my info is just from the GSA, so.
Yeah, it's
Well,
not,
you need to-
it's a tool for planning for future.
You're gonna log in once a year, make sure that you're in compliance.
That's right.
Move on.
And then do your best next year, or adjust your.
even if your crop needs water and that thing says you're not gonna pump, you're not gonna give last irrigation to make your crop.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
what problem is.
Well,
Yeah.
Like we talked about losing the chop earlier, and call it good.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or like for me, if I'm doing alfalfa and it's middle of summer, I may choose not to double irrigate that particular cutting.
Or go 35.
You know, that would save my irrigation, like, wait a minute, I need to push this to the end.
Yeah, straight
You
up.
know, like in TID, we're given 42 inches. And they have a running total of what surface waters that can be delivered.
Yeah.
Well, that's how, but that's not what this is about. We need to make sure that the farmers understand that that's not what this website is designed to do. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this talk.
I guess I'm not jiving it, because to me, like, I do need a running total. If it's gonna be an accounting platform, just like it's a bank account, I need a running.
It has a running total. It's just a question of whether you're using that. It's gonna be showing that a month behind.
Huh? That's walking total then. That's not really running. Yeah,
If it's mailing a bank statement rather you looking at the app.
exactly.
Yeah.
So.
And
If you're watch,
wait,
I'm sorry,
wait.
Land IQ is like 5 or 6 months behind.
they're about 2 months behind. They take the satellite read, they process it, and they give it to you basically the next month as a piece of paper.
As the farmer,
What's
as close to the farmer, it's longer than that.
okay?
But 2-3 months minimum.
Recognize OpenET, when you're looking at that data on OpenET, it's showing the prior month, it's a month behind. They're continuing to work on improvements. I know that that's the intent is to get it so it's more frequent data. But I think that each one of those frequency steps comes with potentially more complications and accuracy issues. So we just gotta manage it for the right purposes. And Blake, I appreciate your point of making sure we're recognizing what it's intended to be today and how that might continue to improve and morph going forward.
You know, Greg, there's another portion of that too, where you're gonna take a parcel and have to follow a section of that parcel. And I know the ET is supposed to pick that up, but I guess we have to just make that part of the process.
The ET should pick that up. And so, you know, one of the things the platform does not have in it right now is how whatever our GSA's rule needs to be regarding this native water source, effective precip / any other fog or whatever. Because that will be removed from that. And so your tracking should be recognizing what actually was being consumed of applied water. So if you didn't apply water to half your field, it should show from that parcel's perspective significantly less consumption.
Yeah.
Greg, real quick too, on the dairies, because of the lagoon, they have water year round. It shows a huge ET on that partial because it's reading water all the time. How do you address that?
So this has not been adopted or even discussed in detail yet, but what, I always get the gentleman's, name, Jeff Vanden Hooden,
And Hubel.
Vanden Hoel.
Bell Produced Council.
Yeah, so they commissioned, whether it was his council or another one, they commissioned a study by Four Creeks, Three Creeks, Four Rivers, Four Creeks, is that right?
Fort Creek, not.
Okay, I knew it was a number and some sort of waterway. And it had done a bunch of analysis, and what they came away with that when you take essentially the footprint of the CAFO operation itself, which would include the lagoon, silage pits, milking parlors, loafing areas, truck turnaround and delivery, all that stuff, that the net consumption off of that acreage was a half a foot per year. And so when we look at monitoring, the concept could be, let's say you have 200 acres of a parcel and 30 of it is your CAFO operation, and the other 170 is crops, part of which are being irrigated out of that lagoon. The ET signature will be picked up, the consumptive use of ET for that 170, and then you would take 30 times a half a foot, which would be 15 more feet, and add it to that consumptive use number, and your total use determined for that 200 acres would be the ET plus that half a foot per that CAFO land. And that would just all get recognized as your use against your buckets.
Okay, that makes sense. But on the ET, it's gonna show a lot more than that. But you'd have to prove to it that it's only half a foot, or show that 60-acre footprint of the dairy.
Recognize you're getting the full sustainable yield and APA from that CAFO operation also. So it essentially is getting used out onto those lands.
Okay.
For any of you that already have an account as you're like one of the early users of it, if you haven't gone to it recently, if you could and provide me feedback, they're accepting it as it comes in. So whenever I get feedback, I can just send it to them and then they'll work on it. To my understanding, it has changed significantly since the first workshop that they did and the second one. And we had a meeting with them last week, I think, and they're saying that they're going to be adding some more features on there. So
I have an answer to a question earlier about publicizing the issue to the farm bureau. And Bree says that they have 1,300 subscribers to the weekly email, but not all farmers are subscribers and not all subscribers are farmers, but that gives you an idea.
Is that just, but that higher count?
That includes all of the county, so that's going to include all the Miagoos, all of MID's area and others.
I think that'd be good. At least good, link,
Yeah.
more than right, right?
That's it.
So before we wrap up, are there thinking?
Right, Red, you have no water. You have no water. Please call us.
Less than 2 acres.
Your wells will not work
Pumping
until you
fee.
call.
Yeah,
us.
pumping fees.
Yeah.
Pumping fees coming to your door.
Yeah.
Please call
Yeah,
back. We need
that'll-
something, because Greg, we have a lot of farmers that I try to educate and they tell me to go pound sand.
That's been almost categorically my same experience.
Dude, it's depressing.
As they say, I've been farming this ground 50 years,
Yep.
nobody's taking my water away.
Uh-huh.
Everybody says that.
See a lot of ground.
We all did that when you were on fine.
Yeah. Everybody's got to hold tight.
Yeah, real tight.
You know, there's gonna be squeeze.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah,
There'll always be a weasel.
yep.
But it's everywhere. Like if you go buy a piece of land nowadays, it says, check with your GSA.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not a secret. It just people choose not to want to understand it or accept it.
They're gonna know when they go meet with their bank.
Yeah, exactly. Banking's like the number one thing is water, water, water.
Or they're just gonna write it out. You know, if they've been farming for 50, 60 years and almost done, it's like, well, done another 5, 7 years in me, I'll sell it and be done. But
You're not selling it for much.
you're not
Yeah.
selling it for much at that point. Yeah.
Especially when you're having a water in your bucket
Exactly.
left.
Yeah, no kidding,
Yeah, 'cause
right,
at that point,
completely screwed,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay,
cool.
So do you guys want to make any recommendations? I think that's the next question to this group. To the May 9th, is that the right one? Or a summary of these conversations and say, we are working on some things like helping give some input on appeal elements and some other considerations and have one of you give that as an update. And all, whether it's formal recommendation or updates, this is all heard by the board and it's very useful. So the formality is probably less important.
I mean, could we say that, in the appeal process, consider,
Yeah, if we're prepared to get that stuff noted and ready, I mean, we could do it on email to get whoever is gonna do it prepared to present.
Or even if-
We can do it right now.
I mean, if we just do a simple thing right now, and then next meeting, we could drill it down a little more
To a
elaborate.
To a formal recommendation.
you
So
know.
do we want one person to go up and just kind of summarize today's meeting, but with the intent and the circumstances that we need an appeal and
Greg, how far along is the ad hoc committee in evaluating some of these appeals? Do we have?
Yeah, not, the appeals have not been a focus yet, working on, trying to define some things. For instance, if I'm gonna allow the leasing of land, how am I accounting for that and how much water is gonna be allowed to be leased with that land out of my bucket? And they've been having some of those conversations that we're starting to try and put into actual policy language. So we've been working on those elements and just flagging areas of appeal. And so they have not been addressed yet.
What do you think, Greg? Should we try and come up with something loose right now, or should we take some time in the next meeting to drill down?
I think of what was brought up here as one of the main important appeal elements is about the land use category classification. And I think that's an important one that should get understood and maybe identify a process sooner rather than later, so that when the board is considering adopting this policy, while the policy may still have holes in it, the major parts are there that says, if you're irrigated lands between date X and date Y, you're going to get X and Z. And then you can appeal. And then there's some information about the appeal process, about what you might need to do to make an appeal. I think that's useful for you guys to help inform that.
how about I think Lou's gonna give the summary at the next GSA meeting.
Is that on the ninth?
Yeah,
Yeah, I can do that.
and then why don't we all just send him a couple of our thoughts from this meeting, and then he can consolidate that into 3 or 4 bullets.
If it is the land use, I can put something together pretty quick. I
Yeah,
can circulate it to the group. My comments. I can get you something.
I think we're all pretty shot right now.
But that should be kosher to do via email, right?
Yeah, just come
Yeah.
to Lou back.
What you guys can't do is you can't. You can respond individually to me.
Mhm.
When I send an email, not violation of Brown Act,
Right, that's,
respond to the group saying, I think we should do this or this.
This
or
isn't a
this.
Brown Act.
It is.
Yes, it is. That's why you guys have to meet in person now.
It's okay, I'm a pro of the Brown Act. So you guys can respond individually to me. Hopefully,
I'll reply all.
just don't reply all. I'll send you guys a reminder. I'll put some thought into the initial draft, so hopefully there's not too many. And I'll get you guys all something by Friday.
I'm comfortable with whatever you come up with on my behalf, sir.
Well, but I'll need your blessing and you want me
It's a recommendation, we should all.
Lou, I would also suggest the development of a mailing list for reaching out with the issues that will be coming currently. We've got to go as suggested, the Farm Bureau and we need to develop a list to start to get information out on a regular basis.
Yeah,
Well, I actually have a list. Well,
I have a list that was given to me, even it's like, but it's kind of like a couple years old, and there's not a ton of people on there.
really?
I think the tax rolls are probably the only surefire way. Is using the county tax rolls. You know, we grab the white area, at least I think all the above approach.
We need an email list too, though.
Email list.
Updated.
Where you get that email from.
Well, you
What
start
about
with,
County, the ad commissioner, the pest
and then there's,
reports.
If the
and there's
county has
sign-up-
access to
there's
that,
sign
of
up
course.
sheets at every GSA meeting and workshop, and you just start consolidating.
Yeah, but they're not even.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
that's what
the
that-
Grand Aston, we have all our
Yeah.
members email back and forth, and you.
That was my comment. It's like, that's the base word. Is you use the-
so I think you guys are suggesting that there's one of the recommendations you want to be able to tell the board is that there's a more that there needs to be a stronger effort placed on email lists and utilizing like the Farm Bureau's newsletters and other things to routinely get information, share information out, and that should be a high priority. And that's kind of like a point to be made. And then the board essentially would direct staff to continue to do that.
Got it.
And then the other appeals, you're gonna make a list of that and send it to us, and then we can kind of marinate on it and talk about it next time. Cool.
And the next GSA meeting's on the 9th, right?
I believe so.
So this appeals blue that you're gonna present, is this gonna be an update, or are you gonna do it as a recommendation?
It's gonna be, I think, a recommendation if we can get,
Feedback.
subscribe to it.
Okay, just so I know how to word it on the agenda.
Push up my logic.
Okay.
And just as an FYI, I think day one of the last TAC meeting, or last TAC meeting was like day one of Ashley being on her own without Lacey. And she's been doing a tremendous job getting up to speed on all some very complicated things. So again, commendations to Ashley for all her hard work on this.
Appreciate it, Ashley. Thank you.
Yeah, actually.
Speaking
We're
of-
asked, we'll vote for the raise.
When did you guys want to meet again? Because I know we got kind of off track a little bit with the schedule, so.
What would have been the.
It was
if
every
we
other.
went- It was once a month on a certain day, I just don't know what day. That the 20th was the one we postponed, right?
think
Yeah,
so.
we postponed.
Right. And we moved from, it was every other month
That'd be great.
meeting,
We got
and we,
once a month since it started to get closer, and
yeah,
July. It's going up to the board, right? So that means we only got like two left.
Yeah, May, yeah, can we do something in May?
so, yeah, I think so. And I want to bring up this point again, on the timing. The board, so I think a little bit of flavoring is important here. The GSP has to be updated and submitted to DWR January 2025. That means the board has to adopt the updated 2025 Merced Subbasin GSP with Miagusa and with Turner Island in early December, which would mean that in November's meeting, the early November meeting would be a public draft of that at least. And Woodard and Kern wants to have a kind of public admin draft, or, you know, I don't know what the right term is, like in September. So in order to give time for Woodard and Kern and us to incorporate the main takeaways of what our policy on allocation looks like, we have to adopt something. We're targeting adopting something in July. That does not necessarily mean the entirety of this policy from a regulatory standpoint will all be in place by then, because we do not plan to include that. It's not going to be an attachment to the GSP. It'll be summarized in the GSP and reflected in modeling in the GSP as to what the intent of it will be. So I want to kind of, I'm only putting that out there because there's ongoing time to continue to have input on some of these elements, like and appeals process. The idea of fines and fees and things are gonna be worked on in 2025. So elements of this will continue to be developed and designed, but a couple of main points are super important for an adoption. The quantity, 13 inches, the type of land classification that gets what and opt-in. And then an appeal associated with that, I think, is another piece of that importance for July.
And Danielle put a comment in the chat saying that right now there's nothing scheduled for a May meeting, and our next scheduled meeting for the TAC is July 23rd. So however many meetings you
That's a
guys
lot.
want to do
Yeah,
in between.
I'd be good to try and meet in May and June if they're trying to get a.
Yeah, I think that would be really good.
I agree.
Did you want to meet mid-month, near the end? What kind of,
I mean, we're literally last day of April,
mean-
so if we meet towards the middle of May, I mean, what does everybody think?
We got Bob.
Yeah.
What we doing third?
No, I won't be around in the middle of May, so you take over for me.
I'll be your alternate.
I'm not so.
What are we doing, the third
Are you here at
Tuesday?
the end?
I'm going up.
Are you here at the end of May?
Where's everybody going? I wanna
No,
go.
we're going for like 10
yeah, because I
days.
think originally it was gonna be, it landed on like Memorial Day or something like that.
When is
then-
Memorial Day this week or this year? Is it 27th of May? Or is it the 3rd of June? I don't think that's right.
27th of May, you're right,
Okay,
Memorial Day.
And Danielle said we've usually done it the 4th Tuesday of the month.
which would be the day after Memorial Day.
Yeah, that might not be very well attended, huh?
Yeah.
I'm
do.
out.
I put things out there, but I do
Don't get holiday.
May.
Yeah, exactly. What is the holiday?
Right.
May 8th, May 10th,
Christmas?
May 14th, I do 8th, 10th, 14th. And then towards later in May, I'm busy, but don't shape it around my schedule, I'm just throwing things out there.
I mean, it should be the week of the 13th or the 20th because.
The week of the 13th, I could do. The week of the 20th, I'm out.
Week of the 20th, yeah, so,
The week of the 13th, then.
Week of the 13th.
yeah, I mean, if you did the 14th, which is the second Tuesday of the month instead of the 4th, I mean, that's only in 2 weeks, right? 3
Yeah.
weeks? Yeah, it's 2 weeks from today.
So you want me to send out an availability for May 14th?
I mean, I think everybody's here.
You should put.
Or-
That date actually works for me.
Oh, there you go. May 14th. We could have Bob here.
13th,
Maybe we'll have a quorum.
13th or 15th.
I think you gotta put out 3 days,
Okay,
times,
The-
and see what.
Yeah,
you want it to be like that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or 3 different Tuesdays is what you're talking about?
Oh, I mean, what we had talked about, whatever everybody thinks, but we had just talked about the week of anytime the week of the 13th.
Can we agree on the 13th today?
I can do the 13th.
I
Okay,
can do the 13th.
That's the Tuesday or Monday?
That's
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 Monday.
Monday.
Yeah.
okay.
it's the day after Mother's Day.
I can do that.
Easy way to remember. Are you good with that, Scott?
That Tuesday would be better for me, but I'm not on your board. I'm just a member of the public, right? So
It still matters.
that Tuesday would be better for me.
Show up.
Okay.
Brad's out that Tuesday.
That Tuesday, I'm out.
Shit.
13th works good for me.
Does the 13th work for you, Greg?
Yes.
Seems like that works.
Okay.
I'm assuming we're talking at 2 o'clock, right?
Yeah,
That's an important point too, not just the day, the time.
15th, yeah.
Is 15th good for you also, Greg?
I could do any 13th, 14th, or 15th at 2 o'clock, and I could potentially be in person on any of those days.
Yeah, I'm good.
Well, I can't do
Okay.
13th.
Right.
Brad, you're screwing it all up for us.
Or 16th.
Okay, so I think 13th.
13th is the one that works for me.
Okay,
13th seems to work the best for everybody.
Yeah. 13th, 2 o'clock.
So you can call in Zoom.
Send
I
that.
typically go to an auction. You guys wouldn't like that.
Just mute
Well,
it.
you'll be muted.
After 7, you're not gonna have any money left.
Yeah, yeah. But
Okay, so next meeting, May 13th at 2 p.m. Sounds good?
Yeah,
Got it.
Okay, and then we'll go over the land classification appeals process and any
I
others
think
that,
that's actually before that, because we gotta present that on the 9th.
okay,
So we'll go through other appeals
Other
processes
Okay.
you're gonna bring forward.
I would like an update on the science study if there is.
Okay, I'll put it on there and I'll see if there's an update by then.
And we're going for an hour or 2 hours?
Dude, I can book it for 2, so.
Seems to me you get burned out around an hour and 45 minutes, so we better do 2.
Okay. All right, we'll end this meeting 4:12. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, everybody.